Amongst the many strange phenomena in Genshin's lore, the Archon War is something that is strangely still a mystery to us all. We're getting a lot of history about the Cataclysm and the 500-year internal battle Tivat is going through with all the changes that event has put the world in, but the war that even began the formation of the Archon seats has yet to be fully explained. So today, I want to propose 4 theories that have been cooking in my mind for several weeks, but I never had the chance to really showcase them in a video considering they're disjointed and don't really have a lot of weight to them. So as a disclaimer, these theories don't connect to each other and are not mutually exclusive. Additionally, these are just me breaking down the potential logistics of the Archon War, and can easily be disproven in the event that I just missed a bunch of text somewhere, especially Sumeru text considering that I haven't gotten to the nitty-gritty of the semantics. So, let's begin. I'll start with the theories that have the most substance, then work my way to the ones that border on speculation. For context, the Archon War, or the War of the Demon Gods, as known in the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean translation, is a war that happened 2,600 to roughly 2,000 years ago, but the final closing numbers are unknown. According to Soraya, the gods were able to coexist peacefully. However, when 7 seats opened amongst the ranks of Celestia, there became a vicious power struggle and the greatest game of musical chairs in Tivat engaged. Sorry, I just really wanted to make that joke. Regardless, many gods fell during that period of time, and even more civilians. From the dozens of gods, there emerged 7 victorious. Now, let's begin with the first theory. The gods were forced to battle, but not all gods have been eliminated, and death isn't the only way for a participant to be considered as eliminated. When we observe the lore of the participants, we know that not all of them are warmongering lords like Morax, but instead unwilling participants. Some just wanted to defend their land, while others fled altogether. There were several criteria to be considered as eliminated. First was exiling yourself into the Dark Sea, a blasphemy in and of itself. Orobashi was a god that followed this example. According to the preliminary study of Sangonomiya and the Oath-Sworn Eye, Orobashi was amongst the gods that did not want to fight in the Archon War because he knew he couldn't best the golden god Morax or the twin gods Baal and Beelzebul. The bit of Era Siderite also states that the defeated gods fled to the Dark Sea, perhaps out of spite and bitterness, and became known as evil gods. Second was that a god can sacrifice their physical body in favor of another god. There are 2 gods that we know have lore about this tidbit. Andreas was a god that let his physical body die because he believed that Mondstadt is not able to withstand his winter, thus letting Barbados become the Anima Archon. Another one was Beelzebul, who according to the Treasure Tales, state a more fantastical tale of A sacrificing her physical body for Makoto. The problem is that A states that the book, at some point, became merely wishful thinking. She specifically states that the Watatsumi portion of the book was where it was most accurate. So the validity of this book stating that Beelzebul sacrificed her physical form for Makoto is questionable, in all honesty. So we can most likely assume that this never happened. Third is that the god can physically just be incapable of fighting gods or put themselves in a vegetative state. This is what happened with Marchosius after the Archon War. And fourth is just death. The second theory is that the goal of the Archon War wasn't to find the most powerful or war-hungry god, but rather the god that is best for ruling the domestic and political side of humanity. Remember how I said that not all gods have to be dead for the sake of another god's victory, like Marchosius and Morax or Baal and Beelzebul? Well, there's a problem with that statement. For example, how does a god be considered the Archon if not for the elimination of other gods? Well, it's probably the one that has the best intentions and plans for humanity, because according to the divine body from Guyun, the lamenting gods who lost in the war were simply unrealized ideals, but they too had designs for a prosperous humanity. Now that I'm truly thinking about it, I don't think that the Archon War was just for the sake of getting the 7 seats, but rather for Celestia to find the most fitting and willing to rule and protect the nation for the prosperity of that country. Yes, Barbados' ideal of having a free nation with little intervention from him unless it's really important contrasted heavily with Morax's 30-year rule over Liyue, but perhaps it was because of the historical context that Mondstadt was put through. Mondstadt was put through Decarabian, a dictator who thought that he was doing the best for the people. Both had good intentions for Mondstadt, but one was just simply the better design in the long run. Well, better is subjective, of course, but at the end it's better than a dictatorship. Beelzebul also had to consider this when she became Baal's Kagemusha. Her reasoning was that Baal had better control over domestic affairs, something she, a hardened warrior, would not. Andreas also had to undergo through this consideration when he passed the torch to Barbados. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata was also able to establish a prosperous and wise civilization in Sumeru, and her emotional resilience, despite the death of the goddess of flowers, proves that she can be a very capable individual despite grief and loss, something that Deshret could not do. There is a strangely political side to the Archon War, one aimed for the quote-unquote betterment of humanity. Third is that the Archon War didn't start because the Seven Nations didn't have rulers, but because Celestia decided to make 7 nations instead of many. Celestia chose to have an extermination of unnecessary gods and a merging of territory. The reason that I bring this theory up is because of how strange the beginning of the Archon War was. The common thought is that the Archon War began because the nations of Tevat were free of ruling deities, but that can't be inherently true. Tevat was already being guarded by the gods. The heavenly envoys used to dwell with humanity. Havria had South Terai, the Caribbean had Storm Terror's lair, Morax and Guizhong had the Guili Plains, and Chi had Mount Chingse. The gods Baal, Beelzebul, and Orobashi were able to live in peace for a time, but the Inazuman part of the Archon War was not yet considered over until Orobashi's death. The Archon War was even known to have been fought by gods that wanted to just defend their location, much like Havria. So there's a deeper story here. What I'm theorizing happened is that the term "establish the 7 nations" doesn't mean they are making new ones, but rather merging the lands of defeated gods into the 7 nations we know today, which is basically like having small tribes unite under one big flag. This theory stops a lot of allegations because it was a common misconception that Tevat, prior to the Archon War, was like Conroya, a godless land that only had their gods chosen after the Archon War. Subsequently, I theorize that there's a purging of gods that was intended by Celestia, because it has to be called a war for a reason. Why Celestia would do this? I don't know. Why they would merge the lands into 7 is strange. The 7 Archons are supposed to represent the 7 elements, but that might also not be completely true either. Venti, prior to becoming the Animo Archon, is already being shaped by the 1,000 Winds. Subsequently, A already had access to the Musou no Hitatachi, and Zhongli with his geospears that shaped Guyun Stone Forest during the Archon War. So the elements are very real even before the Archons. Plus, elemental creatures like slimes and specters didn't come from the Archons. They came from the elemental plane, where the Archons most likely came from too. The elements are just nature's constant, something that the gods use, but do not innately have rule over. They could most likely control it to a grand extent, but not necessarily have any true authority over it. So why would Celestia want to have gods that quote-unquote ruled over the 7 nations and 7 elements? Well, this reminds me a lot about the 7 dragon heirs. For context, Tevat wasn't Celestia's, and it was most likely not even called Tevat at the time. It was just a planet that the primordial one named Phanis found that was already inhabited by the bishops. Phanis waged war against the rulers of the old world, the 7 dragon heirs, and was successful. My guess is that Tevat, at some point, needed to follow this structure. One god for one element, for the sake of balance. Because if you have multiple gods running around with unprecedented power over Animo, or Geo, or Electro, or any of the 7, there will most likely be unwarranted consequences in the long run, like how the Caribbean used his storms to cut off his capital city. Maybe Celestia thought that it was just better to channel the elements into the Gnosis, and then hand those off to the gods that most deserve them, and that has proved will use it for the betterment of humanity. But yes, those are just brain dumps and my personal theories of what in the world happened in the Archon War, because honestly, we don't really have any concrete evidence of anything. No timeline, no nothing. Well, we do, but it's just pretty vague. But anyway, next video will also be about unmasking the truth of other gods that we've come to know, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. I need to succeed, nobody can stop me. No problem if I wanna pack up and run away. It's my business if I feel the need to smoke and drink and sway. It's my problem, and I feel the need to hide. It's my problem if I have no friends that feel I wanted. Are you satisfied with an easy life? Once you cross the line, will you be satisfied? Ow. Puta. Oh shit, nakaw yung... Anyway, sure.